I stood in the corner of the upscale restaurant, champagne glass in hand, watching my mother introduce her two sons to my brother's fiancée and her family. Her voice swelled with pride when she talked about Graham, the successful doctor with his own practice. Then her tone shifted. She glanced at me and said almost dismissively, "This one just plays with books all day." I felt the familiar sting, but I had grown accustomed to it. What she did not know was that those books had changed my life in ways she could not begin to imagine. Before I tell you how my whole family discovered the truth, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like button. If you have ever felt underestimated by someone who should have believed in you, subscribe and stick around. Trust me, what happened next at that engagement party changed everything. Growing up in a middle-class suburb, I learned early what it meant to live in someone else's shadow. My father died when I was 12 years old. A drunk driver ran a red light on a Tuesday evening, and just like that, our family shrank from 4 to 3. My mother was left to raise 2 boys alone, and she poured everything she had into making sure we turned out all right. Graham, my older brother by 5 years, became the golden child almost immediately. He excelled at football in high school, maintained straight A grades, and had a smile that could charm anyone. Teachers loved him. Coaches praised him. Our relatives called him the perfect son. I was different. While Graham threw spiral passes on Friday nights under stadium lights, I spent my evenings curled up in the back corner of our local library. The smell of old paper and binding glue became my comfort. I discovered entire universes between those pages, worlds where quiet kids like me could be heroes, where words mattered more than touchdowns. By 8th grade, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I filled notebook after notebook with stories about adventures I would never have and people I would never meet. My mother found one of my notebooks once and flipped through it with a confused expression. She asked me why I wasted time on make-believe when I could be studying something useful. The comparisons started small but grew relentless over the years. When Graham got accepted into medical school, my mother called every relative we had. She hosted a celebration dinner and invited the neighbors. When I told her I wanted to major in English literature, she went quiet for 3 full days. Finally, she sat me down at the kitchen table and asked if I understood that writing did not pay bills. She told me she had sacrificed too much for me to throw my future away on fairy tales. I tried to explain that literature was not just fairy tales, that storytellers shaped culture and preserved history, but she waved her hand and walked away. At family gatherings, the introductions became a ritual of humiliation. My mother would beam as she presented Graham, my son, the doctor. Then she would gesture vaguely in my direction and say, "And this one is still figuring things out. He studies books, you know." The phrase hung in the air like an apology. Relatives would nod politely and quickly change the subject. I learned to make myself small at these events, to fade into the background where expectations could not reach me. After college, the divide only deepened. Graham opened his own practice and bought a house with a 2-car garage. He sent our mother pictures of his office, his diploma hanging proudly on the wall. I worked part-time at an independent bookstore downtown, surrounded by the very thing that had always brought me joy. The pay was modest enough to cover rent in a tiny studio apartment and groceries if I was careful. But the job gave me something more valuable than money. It gave me time to write. I finished my first novel when I was 26 years old. It had taken me 3 years of early mornings before my bookstore shifts and late nights after closing. The manuscript was 412 pages of everything I had inside me, a story about loss and resilience and finding yourself when the world tells you that you are not enough. I sent query letters to 43 literary agents. 42 of them said no. The 43rd said maybe. That maybe turned into a contract with a small independent publisher 6 months later. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Graham. The thought of sharing something so personal, so vulnerable, only to have it dismissed or worse, mocked, felt unbearable. My book came out with minimal fanfare. A few hundred copies sold in the first month. I kept working at the bookstore, kept writing in the margins of my life, and let my family believe I was exactly who they thought I was. A disappointment. 2 years after my first novel quietly entered the world, I finished my second manuscript. This time I had learned from my mistakes. The writing was tighter, the characters more vivid, the plot more compelling. I sent it to a dozen agents, and within 2 weeks, 3 of them wanted to represent me. I signed with an agent who believed in the story as much as I did. She sold the book to a major publishing house for an advance that made my hands shake when I saw the number. The publisher invested heavily in marketing. They sent advance copies to influential book bloggers and major reviewers. They scheduled a book tour across 15 cities. When the novel released, it landed on the New York Times bestseller list in its first week. Readers connected with the story in ways I had never imagined. They wrote letters telling me how the book had helped them through difficult times, how they saw themselves in the characters, how the ending had made them cry on public transportation. Within 6 months, the book had sold over 200,000 copies. My mother had no idea. Neither did Graham. I published under my full legal name, Cletus Robert Harrington, but my family never thought to search for me online. Why would they? In their minds, I was still the kid who wasted time with books instead of building a real career. The bookstore job provided perfect cover. When my mother called to ask how I was doing, I told her work was fine, which was true. I just did not mention that my work had shifted from shelving books to writing them. The success of my second novel opened doors I had only dreamed about. I was invited to literary festivals and author panels. Book clubs across the country chose my novels for their monthly reads. A popular morning talk show flew me to New York for an interview. I sat on a couch across from a host who gushed about my writing while millions of people watched. My mother was not one of them. She did not watch programs about books. I moved from my studio apartment to a spacious loft in a different city 3 hours away from where my mother and Graham lived. The distance felt necessary. Every phone call with my mother followed the same script. She would ask about Graham's latest achievements, then circle back to me with thinly veiled concern. When was I going to find a stable job? Did I ever think about going back to school for something practical? At 30 years old, was I not worried about my future? I gave vague answers and changed the subject. The truth sat heavy in my chest, but I could not bring myself to share it. What if she suddenly cared only because I had money? What if she started bragging about me the way she bragged about Graham, not because she was proud of my work, but because success made me acceptable? By the time I finished my third novel, had learned to live 2 separate lives. To the reading public, I was Cletus Robert Harrington, best-selling author and emerging voice in contemporary fiction. To my family, I was still Cletus, the underachiever who worked retail and played with books. The disconnect became easier to maintain than I expected. My mother did not follow literary news. Graham was too busy with his medical practice to pay attention to what was happening in publishing. They existed in a world where my kind of success did not register. Then Graham called with news. He had met someone special, a woman named Delilah, who worked as a corporate attorney. They had been dating for 18 months, and he was going to propose. He wanted me to be there when it happened, wanted the whole family together for the celebration. I felt genuinely happy for him. Graham had always been kind to me, even if he never stood up to our mother's criticisms. He deserved love and happiness. 3 months later, the engagement party invitation arrived in my mailbox. My mother called the same day. Her voice carried a warning I knew well. She told me I needed to be there, needed to look presentable, needed to not embarrass the family in front of Delilah's relatives. I promised I would come. As I hung up the phone, a familiar dread settled in my stomach. I knew exactly how the evening would unfold. The restaurant Graham chose for the engagement party was the kind of place where the prices were not listed on the menu and the waiters wore white gloves. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Round tables draped in ivory linens filled the private dining room he had reserved. I arrived early, hoping to blend into the background before the crowd gathered. My mother was already there, directing the staff on flower arrangements like she was planning a state dinner. She spotted me immediately. Her eyes scanned my outfit, a simple navy blazer over a button-down shirt and dark jeans. I watched her mouth tighten in that way that meant she disapproved but would not say anything until later. Graham appeared moments after, looking relaxed in a gray suit, his arm around Delilah. She was striking with sharp, intelligent eyes and an easy confidence that suggested she was comfortable anywhere. When Graham introduced us, Delilah shook my hand firmly and smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. Guests began arriving in clusters. Relatives I had not seen in years. Graham's medical school friends, Delilah's family and colleagues. My mother moved through the room like a conductor, orchestrating introductions and ensuring everyone felt welcome. I found a seat at a table near the back and hoped to remain invisible for the evening. That hope died quickly. During the cocktail hour, my mother gathered a group that included Delilah's parents and several aunts and uncles. She called Graham and me over. Her face glowed with pride as she launched into her rehearsed speech about her wonderful sons. She talked about Graham's journey through medical school, his dedication to his patients, his bright future. Everyone nodded approvingly. Then she turned to me, and the energy shifted. She said, "And my other son, well, he is still finding his way. He works at a bookstore. He likes to read and write things. I keep hoping he will discover something more substantial, but you know how creative types are." Awkward laughter rippled through the group. I felt my face flush hot. A few people glanced at me with pity. Others looked away entirely. Graham shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Delilah, however, watched me closely. Her expression was not pity, it was curiosity. The formal dinner began shortly after. Plates of food I barely tasted appeared and disappeared. My mother gave a toast that praised Graham's accomplishments and wished the happy couple a beautiful future. She mentioned me once, saying she hoped I would learn from my brother's example of hard work and responsibility. The words landed like stones. I kept my expression neutral and drained my water glass. After dinner, as guests mingled over coffee and dessert, Delilah made her way to my table. She sat down across from me without asking, which I appreciated. Small talk felt suffocating. She asked me directly what I wrote about. I gave her my standard deflection. Just stories, nothing special. Things that interest me. She tilted her head and studied me for a moment. Then she said something that caught me off guard. She told me she loved reading, that books had gotten her through law school when the pressure felt unbearable. She asked if I had published anything. I hesitated. The truth balanced on the edge of my tongue. But years of keeping the secret, of protecting myself from judgment, made me cautious. I told her I had a couple things out there, but nothing worth mentioning. She seemed unconvinced, but she did not press. We talked for a few more minutes about favorite authors and genres before she was pulled away by relatives wanting to congratulate her. That night, after I returned to my hotel room, I lay awake wondering what would have happened if I had told Delilah the truth. Would she have believed me? Would it have mattered? The questions circled in my mind until exhaustion finally pulled me under. What I did not know was that Delilah had gone home with those same questions. Something about the way I had deflected, the way my mother had spoken about me with such dismissive certainty, did not add up. Delilah was an attorney. She was trained to notice inconsistencies, to dig deeper when things did not make sense. Before she went to bed, she opened her laptop and typed my full name into the search bar. The results filled her screen: author pages, book reviews, interview videos, award nominations. Photos of me at literary events, standing in front of audiences, signing books for long lines of readers. She clicked on one of my book covers and realized with shock that she owned it. She had read it 8 months ago and loved it so much she had recommended it to 3 friends. The author she had admired, whose words had moved her, was the same man her future mother-in-law had called a disappointment just hours earlier. Delilah called Graham immediately, even though it was past midnight. She asked him if he knew what his brother did for a living. Graham, confused and half asleep, said I worked at a bookstore. Delilah told him to Google my name right then. She heard the silence on the other end of the line stretch out as he read what she had found. When he finally spoke, his voice was stunned. He asked why I had never told anyone. Delilah said she did not know, but she intended to find out. The next morning, Graham called me. He asked flat out if I was actually the Cletus Robert Harrington who wrote best-selling novels. I could have denied it. I could have made up some story about a different person with the same name. Instead, I felt something inside me release. I told him yes. He asked why I had kept it secret. I said, would it have mattered? Mom already decided who I am. Anything I accomplished would either be dismissed or turned into something about her. I wanted to succeed on my own terms without her validation. Graham went quiet. Then he said he understood and he was sorry he had never stood up for me. The apology meant more than I expected. Delilah, however, was not content to leave things as they were. 2 days after the engagement party, she asked to meet my mother for coffee. My mother, thrilled that her future daughter-in-law wanted to spend time with her, agreed immediately. They met at a cafe near my mother's house. Delilah brought a tote bag with 3 of my novels inside. She placed the books on the table between them. My mother glanced at the covers with polite disinterest. Delilah asked if she recognized the author's name. My mother squinted at the text and then froze. She looked up at Delilah, confusion clouding her face. Delilah explained that these books, which had sold hundreds of thousands of copies, which had won awards and topped bestseller lists, were written by her son. The son she had called a disappointment. The son she told everyone was wasting his life. My mother tried to argue. She said it could not be true that I would have told her something like that. Delilah pulled out her phone and showed her reviews, interviews, sales rankings. She showed her photos of me at book signings and literary festivals. The evidence was undeniable. My mother's face went pale. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the books and flipped through it. She asked in a small voice why I had never said anything. Delilah did not sugarcoat her response. She told my mother that perhaps I had not felt safe sharing something so important with someone who had spent years making me feel worthless. My mother flinched, but did not argue. She sat there, staring at the books as the weight of her years of dismissal settled over her. That evening my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I almost did not answer. When I finally picked up, her voice was shaking. She said she needed to see me, needed to talk. I agreed to meet her the following day at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop halfway between our cities. She arrived before me, looking smaller, somehow diminished. When I sat down across from her, she immediately started crying. She said she did not know that she was sorry that she had been wrong about everything. I let her speak without interrupting. When she finally ran out of words, I leaned back in my chair and took a breath. I told her that she did not know because she never asked. She never believed in me. She spent my entire life comparing me to Graham, holding me up against a measuring stick I was never meant to fit. I explained that I was successful, deeply and undeniably successful, but not in the way she had defined success. And that was the problem. Her love, her approval had always come with conditions. I had to be who she wanted me to be, or I was not worth celebrating. She tried to defend herself. She said she only wanted me to be stable, to have security. I told her that security came in many forms and that my writing had given me more stability than most people ever find. But beyond that, it had given me purpose. It had given me a voice. It had given me a life I was proud of, even when she was not. My mother asked what she could do to fix things. I told her the truth. I said I did not need her to suddenly brag about me to relatives or post about my books on social media. I did not need her to overcompensate for years of neglect with performative pride. What I needed was respect. I needed her to see me as I actually was, not as she wished I would be. I needed her to understand that I had built something meaningful without her approval, and that her approval now, after the fact, felt hollow. I told her that I was willing to rebuild our relationship, but it would have to be on different terms. No more comparisons. No more dismissive comments. No more treating my passion like a phase I needed to outgrow. If she could not offer me that basic respect, then we would remain distant. The choice was hers. She nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her face. She promised to do better. I told her I hoped she meant it, but that I would be watching. Trust once broken takes time to rebuild. In the months that followed, my mother made genuine efforts to change. She asked about my writing with real interest. She read my books, all of them, and called to discuss her thoughts. Some of her observations were clumsy, and sometimes she still slipped into old patterns of comparison, but I could see her trying. It was not perfect, but it was progress. Graham and Delilah got married in a ceremony filled with love and laughter. During the reception, Delilah pulled me aside and thanked me for being honest with her that night after the engagement party, even though I had tried to hide. She said that honesty, however guarded, had pushed her to look deeper. She told me she was glad she did. I hugged her and thanked her for seeing me when no one else had bothered to look. Graham gave a toast during the reception and mentioned how proud he was to have a brother who created worlds with words. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged my work, and it meant more than any bestseller list ever could. As for me, I continued writing. The recognition was gratifying, and the financial security allowed me to focus entirely on my craft. But those things were not why I wrote. I wrote because stories mattered. I wrote because putting words on a page made sense of a world that often felt chaotic and unfair. I wrote because somewhere out there a kid like I used to be was sitting in a library feeling unseen, and my words might help them feel less alone. I learned something crucial through all of this. You cannot live your life trying to meet other people's expectations, especially when those expectations are rooted in their own fears and limitations. Success is not defined by someone else's narrow vision of what your life should look like. It is defined by whether you are doing what you love, what challenges you, what makes you feel alive. My mother doubted me for years because she could not see past her own understanding of what mattered, but her blindness did not diminish my worth. It only revealed her limitations. The right people like Delilah will see you when the time is right. The right people will celebrate you not because of what you have achieved, but because of who you are. I no longer carry the weight of needing my mother's approval. I built a life I am proud of, filled with work that matters and people who value me. That is enough. That has always been enough. Sometimes the people who doubt you most are the ones who should believe in you first. But their doubt does not write your story. You do. And if they never see your worth, that says everything about them and nothing about you. Keep going. Keep creating. Keep being exactly who you are meant to be. The right people will find you. And when they do, they will wonder how anyone ever overlooked you in the first place. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Have you ever achieved something meaningful that the people around you failed to recognize? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories matter to me. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories about resilience, family, and finding your own path. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your worth is not determined by who sees it. Keep shining wherever you are.